that reduced classroom size, even though it raises the earnings of the children who have smaller classes, costs a lot of money because you have to hire those teachers. And it's even more than you would get from a simple static model where you just say, here's the salary, because if you have a massive program like California, you bid up classroom size, you bid up teacher salaries. So when you actually compute what the rate of return is to reduce classroom size, it's negative. It's a negative rate of return. So it's better to give the kid a savings account, a bond, a U.S. savings bond, than to reduce classroom size. You're going to be ahead in terms of the finances. And this, I think, is very important because it's always in these programs not just saying absolutely, is this a good thing to do? It's an important thing to say, how good is this relative to other options? And I'll show you some of those other options. Convict rehabilitation programs are notoriously unsuccessful. We've tried this in many ways. Now the argument can be made, no, convict rehabilitation programs can work. And I have not denying they can't work. They can work. But the problem is that anything we've tried to date has not worked. So anything that we try that's going to be really successful is going to have to cost a lot more money if we're going to get any of the effects that we might get from early intervention. So I would argue if we do the cost-benefit analysis, we're going to find substantial return. So this is a diagram which is drawn up. We actually have some econometric estimates that support this. But this is more of a stylized graph. And what we're doing is a hypothetical experiment. Economists like to do these things. We say, suppose that I'm starting with $1 of expenditure. And I'm asking, where should I spend the first dollar? Not what the equilibrium amount is, but where do I spend the first dollar? Well, we have this, what's called a technology of skill formation. So the early investment gives the base for later investments. So if you create a big capital stock early in life, it means that you can actually harvest a lot of returns because it's easier to educate the kids, you reduce crime, you reduce the need for job training and remediation. And so what we find, and if you look at the evidence, and I've written on this in several places, but what you find is a decreasing return. It's not that there's no return either. There are really substantial returns to job training. But it's much easier to do public job training if you have a highly educated, highly motivated workforce to train. If you're trying at age 18 or 19 to get an adult illiterate to learn, or a late adolescent, early adult literate to essentially learn how to read and write, it's very, very costly. And one of the biggest costs actually is just motivating the people. It's embarrassing to have to learn to read and write, and a lot of the very same factors I talked about, not being able to get out of bed in the morning and show up for these programs, it shows up. So let me, I'll skip over language acquisition, which is well known, but there is a literature here which talks about the technology of skill formation. I don't know, I should probably end pretty soon, right? So we can talk, but let me give you some idea of this. So I probably shouldn't get into too many economics, too much mathematics here. But there is a large body of research that shows that early endowments and environment matters. But I don't want to leave you with the impression that it's only early years. I mean, that's an insane notion. Remediation is costly, but it's also the case that we can remediate. So any kind of policy analysis has to account for the following fact. At any point in time, it's ideal maybe to spend more money on the young children than trying to cure yesterday's problems. But today we actually have a lot of the residue from yesterday's mistakes. What do we do with them? How costly is it to do so? Well, in some work with Flavio Cunha, we've actually estimated that. And I'll skip past all this. I don't think you want to see all this, actually. A lot of mathematics, and I think maybe not so much interest in it. So I'll skip all that. But what I will do is the following. I'll show you some estimates. I'll just show you one set of estimates. Yes, this is something that takes us right back to Perry. So this is a table which actually takes you to the Perry program. So what we do is we actually estimate the technology. I drew this graph for you but there is an econometrics underlies that. So we can talk about the investments early on and later on. It turns out that cognitive skills tend to be what are called critical periods emerge much earlier for cognitive skills than non-cognitive skills. Early on in the life of the child, the early years are very important for cognitive condition, and it's much harder to substitute by later interventions to compensate for adverse early investments in cognitive skills. However, For non-cognitive skills, there's more evidence of elasticity of substitution. Things are more substitutable. It's more possible to compensate for adverse cognitive environments. Let me show you just a calculation, and then I'll stop or just summarize. This is a calculation that shows you actually what the Perry baseline kids were like. I was recently in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I was shocked to find this is actually a description of what Springfield, Massachusetts looks like right now. So the high school graduation rate in Springfield and in the Perry control group was 41%. So they graduated, not very high. Enrollment in college was about 5%, not zero, but low, very low. Conviction rates 22%, probation rates 21%, welfare participation 17%. So what did Perry do? Well, it turns out Perry actually moved kids to these numbers here. These are roughly the Perry numbers. This is basically telling you that what Perry is doing, and although it's a long story to get to it, what Perry is actually doing is it's taking kids, it's as if we move the kids from the bottom of the parental environmental distribution to the fourth decile, not quite to the median. It's moving them up, not the bottom. They start at the bottom, they move up to the second, third, fourth decile, so they're not quite at the median. And if you do that, you get this thing here. But these are the Perry-like results. So if you invest early, and you just invest early, that's what you get. Now what we ask is the following question. We say, suppose instead of investing early on, we take the same disadvantaged kids and then ask where would you have to go to invest to get those kids to Perry levels, but you do it in adolescent intervention, so you wait. Now from the economics of this situation, it's always advantageous to wait in one dimension, right? Because if you can postpone a payment, I mean, suppose you can get the same outcome either at 18 or at age 1. You can wait 17 years. You put the money in a bank and you make, it's a good thing to do. Problem is the technology isn't quite permitting you to do that. It's going to turn out to be very much more costly to do that because early years are showing much higher productivity than later years. That's the idea. So you can do it, but it turns out if you do it, it's like moving the kid from the bottom of the distribution to the 9th decile, which is really at the top of the distribution. But you can get basically Perry-like results. Now, on the other hand, if you ask what's the cost here, I didn't show it, but you're getting between 40 and 50% more in terms of present value to do that. So yes, you can remediate. You can. On average, anyway, you can remediate, but it's going to be much more costly. So even putting it off, it's going to be much more costly in present value terms. And so what this last column shows is something that's quite interesting, I think. It says, suppose instead of this policy, which was wait, just let the problem fester until about 15 to 18, and then invest, suppose we had a balanced policy, and you optimally distribute according to the technology, just using that graph that I put up. Then if you smoothly do it, economists like smooth solutions, and the technology suggests that actually if you spent this amount of money, but you distribute it over the lifetime, you have to spend more money here relative to this, right? But if you spend this amount of money, but do it in a smooth way, which puts relatively more in the early years and a little bit less, then you get basically middle-class performance. You're getting 91% high school graduation rates, 37% college attendance rates, which is about a middle-class rate, 10%. There's still higher crime rates. It's not completely satisfactory, but nonetheless, it's suggesting that early interventions are quite important. So the idea is, yes, invest early, but it must be followed up to be effective. So let me just summarize, and then we can open to discussion. First of all, I want to try to suggest to you that skills matter. Skills matter, and skills are multiple in nature. America has a skills problem. There's no doubt about it. And in fact, if you look at it, most of the trends done by the productivity analysts have shown that we're having